The cracked earth beneath Yates Morrow's boots looked like shattered glass, and he stood in the middle of what used to be his cattle ranch, watching the last of his herd being driven away by men he owed money to. The summer of 1885 had brought a drought so severe that the Snake River tributaries feeding into southeastern Idaho had dried to mud, and with them, every dream he'd built over the past 6 years. His father's land, his inheritance, his future, all of it withering under a merciless sun that seemed to mock his 24 years of stubborn hope. The banker from Malad City had given him until August to make good on the loan, but August had come and gone 2 weeks ago, and now September offered nothing but dust devils and dead grass. Yates watched the cattle disappear down the valley road, their lowing fading into the hot afternoon air. 50 head of good breeding stock, gone. The barn stood empty. The well had gone dry 3 months back. Even the creek that ran along the eastern property line had become nothing more than a sandy depression filled with smooth stones and the bones of small animals. He was 24 years old and completely ruined. Yates walked back toward the ranch house, a modest 2-story structure his father had built with timber hauled from the mountains. The paint had started peeling 2 years ago, and he'd never had the money to fix it. Now it didn't matter. The bank would take the house too, probably sell it to some land speculator from back east who'd never set foot in Idaho, who'd never know what it meant to lose everything to something as simple and devastating as the absence of rain. Inside, the house felt hollow. His mother had died when he was 12, and his father had followed her 6 years later, leaving Yates alone with a struggling ranch and a determination to make it work. He'd worked harder than any man in Box Elder County, up before dawn, in bed long after dark, doing the work of 3 men because he couldn't afford to hire help. And for what? To watch it all crumble because the sky refused to open. He poured himself water from the last jug he'd filled in town, rationing it carefully. Even Malad City's wells were running low, and people were getting nervous. There'd been talk of violence if things didn't improve soon, fights over water rights, accusations of upstream theft, the kind of desperation that turned neighbors into enemies. Yates sat at the kitchen table and put his head in his hands. He had maybe $40 to his name, no livestock, no prospects, and nowhere to go. His cousins in Oregon had written months ago suggesting he come west, but he'd been too proud to abandon the ranch. Now pride seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. The sound of hoofbeats made him lift his head. Through the window, he saw a rider approaching. No, 2 riders. One on horseback, the other driving a small wagon loaded with supplies. Yates stood slowly, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver on his hip. Strangers didn't just appear on your property for friendly conversation. Not in times like these. He walked out onto the porch and waited, squinting against the glare. As the riders drew closer, he realized the one on horseback was a woman. She sat straight in the saddle, wearing a split riding skirt and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded her face. The wagon driver was an older man, grizzled and weathered, with the look of someone who'd spent his whole life working under the sun. The woman reined in her horse about 10 feet from the porch. She pushed her hat back, and Yates got his first clear look at her face. She was young, probably close to his own age, with dark blonde hair pulled back in a practical braid, and eyes the color of winter sage gray-green and direct. Pretty, in a way that suggested she didn't spend much time thinking about it. "You Yates Morrow?" she asked. Her voice was clear and confident without the affected sweetness some women used when talking to men. "I am, and you are, Cora Thorne. This is my foreman, Dutch Henderson." She gestured to the man in the wagon, who nodded once. "I own the property 3 miles north of here, up near the canyon mouth. Yates knew the place vaguely, a smaller spread that had always seemed to be just scraping by. "What can I do for you, Miss Thorne?" "It's what I can do for you, Mr. Morrow." She dismounted in one smooth motion and walked closer, her boots stirring small clouds of dust. "I heard the bank took your cattle today. I'm sorry about that. I know what it's like to lose something you've worked for." He stiffened. "If you've come to offer charity, I'm not interested." "Good, because I'm not offering any." She stopped at the base of the porch steps and looked up at him. In the direct sunlight, he could see faint freckles across her nose and a scar above her left eyebrow, small and white with age. "I'm here to propose a business arrangement." That caught his attention. "What kind of arrangement?" "The kind that might save both our ranches." She pulled a folded document from her jacket pocket and held it up. "I have water rights to Birch Creek, the tributary that runs through the canyon above my property. My grandfather secured them back in 1868, and they're legal and binding. Even in a drought year like this, the creek's still running, not strong, but enough to sustain cattle and irrigate some acreage." Yates felt his heart skip. Birch Creek. He knew it, had fished there as a boy. It came down from higher elevations where the snowpack lasted longer, fed by springs that went deep into the mountain. If she had rights to that water, she had something more valuable than gold. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked carefully. "Because water rights don't mean much if I don't have cattle to water or land to irrigate. I lost my father last winter, pneumonia. He was the one who knew how to run the ranch, how to manage the herd, how to negotiate with buyers. I've been trying to keep things going, but I'm one woman with a foreman who's 70 years old and 2 ranch hands who are good with horses but not much else. I need help, Mr. Morrow, real help. You could hire men." "I could if I had money to pay them, but I don't. The drought's hit me hard too, just not quite as hard as it's hit you." She climbed the steps, closing the distance between them. Up close, she smelled like horse and sage and something clean like rain. "Here's what I'm proposing. You move your operation to my property. We combine our resources, my water rights, and what's left of my herd with your knowledge and reputation. Everyone in Box Elder County knows you're the best cattleman under 30 in Idaho. Dutch says your father trained you right, and that if anyone can make a ranch profitable in a drought year, it's you." Yates stared at her. "You're suggesting a partnership." "Exactly. 50-50 split on all profits. You help me run the ranch, I provide the water and the land. We pool what money we have left to get through the winter, and when the drought breaks, and it will break, eventually we'll be in position to rebuild twice as strong as either of us could alone." It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning man, and Yates wanted to grab it so badly it hurt. But years of hard lessons had taught him to be cautious. "What's to stop you from cutting me out once we're profitable again? It's your land, your water rights." Cora held up the document again. "We'll draw up a legal contract. I've already spoken to John Pritchard, the lawyer in Malad City. He says he can write something binding that protects both our interests. I'm not trying to cheat you, Mr. Morrow. I'm trying to survive, same as you. And I think we have a better chance of doing that together than apart." The wagon driver, Dutch, finally spoke up. His voice was rough as gravel. "Boy, you'd be a fool to turn this down. Miss Cora's being more than fair, and that water's real. I've seen it myself. Still running clear and cold when everything else is dust." Yates looked from Dutch to Cora, studying her face for any sign of deception. All he saw was determination, and a kind of weary honesty that matched his own exhaustion. She was right, they were both desperate. But sometimes desperation made people sharper, more focused. Sometimes it was the only thing that kept you alive. "Can I see the water rights documentation?" he asked. She handed it over without hesitation. He unfolded the yellowed paper and read carefully. It was legitimate, signed by a territorial judge and registered with the county. Birch Creek water rights in perpetuity granted to Thomas Thorne and his heirs. Cora's name was listed at the bottom as current holder, updated just 2 months ago after her father's death. "This is real," he said slowly. "Of course it's real. I don't play games, Mr. Morrow." He folded the paper and handed it back. His mind was racing, calculating possibilities. With reliable water, they could keep a small herd alive through the winter. Come spring, if the rains returned, they could buy more cattle, expand the operation. It would be hard work, brutally hard, but it was a chance. The only chance he had left. "When would we start?" he asked. A smile flickered across Cora's face, quick and genuine. "Tomorrow. Tonight if you're ready. We've got space in the barn for your equipment, and there's a foreman's cabin on the property that's been empty since Dutch moved into the main house after my father died. It's yours if you want it. I'll need to bring what's left of my tools, my personal belongings. Dutch can help you load up. We brought the wagon for exactly that purpose." Yates looked around at the ranch that had been his entire world for as long as he could remember. Walking away felt like betrayal, like admitting defeat. But staying here with no water and no cattle wasn't bravery, it was just slow suicide. "All right," he said, and felt the words change something fundamental in his chest. "We have a deal, Miss Thorne. Partnership, 50-50, with a legal contract to protect both parties." Cora extended her hand, and he shook it. Her grip was firm and calloused, the hand of someone who worked hard and didn't apologize for it. "We'll go to Pritchard's office first thing tomorrow and get the paperwork drawn up. For tonight, let's just get you moved." They worked until well after sunset, loading Yates's tools, his father's old saddle, his mother's few pieces of good china, and everything else worth taking into the wagon. It wasn't much. The bank had already claimed anything of significant value, but it was his, and that meant something. Dutch proved to be stronger than his age suggested, hauling equipment with steady efficiency while Cora helped tie everything down securely. By the time they finished, stars had emerged in the clear black sky, sharp and cold and indifferent. Yates took one last look at the empty house, then swung up onto his horse and followed Cora and Dutch north along the valley road. The Thorne Ranch appeared as a cluster of dark shapes against the mountainside, backed by the looming bulk of the canyon. As they drew closer, Yates could make out more details: a barn in better repair than his had been, a main house that looked solid and well built, several corrals, and off to one side, a small cabin. Lamplight glowed in the main house windows, warm and welcoming. "That's your place," Cora said, pointing to the cabin. "It's not fancy, but it's dry and the stove works. There's a bed and basic furniture. We'll bring your things over in the morning. It's fine. Better than fine." Yates climbed down from his horse, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. The adrenaline that had carried him through the day was draining away, leaving behind bone-deep weariness. Cora seemed to sense it. "There's stew left from dinner. Dutch, can you show Mr. Morrow to the cabin and get him settled? I'll bring food over." "Sure thing, Miss Cora." Dutch gestured for Yates to follow. The cabin was small but clean, with a simple cot, a table, 2 chairs, and a pot-bellied stove. Someone had left wood stacked neatly beside it, ready to be lit. Miss Cora's father built this place for his foreman 20 years back. "It's seen a lot of good men come through. You'll be comfortable here. Thank you." Yates set down the bag he'd been carrying and looked around. It was strange to think this was home now, this little cabin on someone else's property. But it was shelter, and it came with hope, and that was more than he'd had 12 hours ago. Cora arrived a few minutes later carrying a covered pot and a basket. Beef stew and fresh bread. Well, fresh as of this morning anyway. There's coffee in here too and some butter. She set everything on the table, efficient and businesslike. "Breakfast is at sunrise in the main house. We start work at first light. I'll be there." She paused at the door, her hand on the frame. In the dim light, her face was softer, less guarded. "I know this is a lot of change all at once, Mr. Morrow, but I think we can make this work. I really do. Call me Yates. If we're partners, we should use first names." "All right, Yates." She smiled slightly. "I'm Cora, not Miss Thorne, just Cora." "Cora," he repeated and liked the way it sounded. "Thank you for this, for the chance. Thank me by helping me save this ranch. That's all I need." She left, and Yates sat down to the first hot meal he'd had in days. The stew was good, rich with vegetables and tender meat, and the bread was better than anything he'd managed to bake for himself. As he ate, he thought about the woman who'd appeared out of nowhere with an offer that seemed too good to be true. Cora Thorne. She was direct and practical, clearly intelligent, and either very brave or very desperate to take on a partner she barely knew. Probably both, he thought. Just like him. He finished eating, banked the fire in the stove, and fell into bed without bothering to undress fully. His last thought before sleep took him was of water cold, clear water running down from the mountains. Life in liquid form, the most precious thing in the world. Morning came fast and bright. Yates woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window and the sound of roosters crowing. He dressed quickly, splashed water on his face from the basin someone had thoughtfully filled, and headed for the main house. Cora was already up, standing at the stove in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and bacon. She'd changed from her riding clothes to a simple dress with an apron over it, her hair still in its practical braid. "Good morning. Coffee's ready and breakfast will be done in a minute. Dutch and the boys already ate. They're out checking the herd. Let me help." Yates moved to take plates down from the shelf, feeling strange and domestic. He couldn't remember the last time he'd shared breakfast with anyone. They worked in companionable silence, Cora scrambling eggs while Yates set the table and poured coffee. It felt oddly natural, as if they'd been doing this for years instead of having met just yesterday. When they sat down to eat, Cora got straight to business. "After we finish here, we'll ride to Malad City and see Pritchard about the contract. This afternoon I want to show you the full extent of the property, including where Birch Creek runs through. You need to understand what we're working with." "Sounds good. What size herd do you have left?" "About 30 head. Mixed stock, mostly Herefords with a few Longhorns. Not enough to be profitable at current prices, but enough to rebuild from if we're careful." Yates did quick calculations. "With my knowledge of breeding and your water access, we could potentially double that in 2 years, assuming the drought breaks and we can afford to buy additional stock." "That's what I'm hoping." Cora met his eyes across the table. "I'm not going to pretend I know everything about running a ranch, Yates. My father kept me involved, but he was old-fashioned about some things. He didn't teach me as much as he should have. I'm relying on you to fill in those gaps." "I'll teach you everything I know. A partnership only works if both people are equally capable." Something shifted in her expression, surprise, maybe, or respect. "Most men wouldn't say that. Most men are fools." He sipped his coffee. "My mother was the smartest person I ever knew. She ran the household accounts and managed all the ranch paperwork until the day she died. My father always said he couldn't have succeeded without her. I learned early that competence doesn't have a gender." Cora studied him for a long moment. "I think I'm going to like working with you, Yates Morrow." The feeling's mutual. They finished breakfast and cleaned up together, then saddled horses and rode into Malad City. The town was small but bustling. The main street lined with false-fronted buildings housing a general store, a bank, a saloon, a hotel, and various other businesses. People moved with the purposeful energy of folks trying to stay ahead of disaster. And everywhere Yates looked he saw the signs of drought-dusty streets, wilting plants, water barrels jealously guarded. John Pritchard's office was above the general store, reached by an outside staircase. The lawyer was a neat, precise man in his 50s who greeted them warmly and listened carefully as Cora explained what they wanted. A partnership agreement with profit sharing and resource pooling, Pritchard summarized, making notes. And you want this ironclad, so neither party can dissolve the arrangement without mutual consent or breach of contract. Exactly, Cora said. Can you write that? Certainly. It will take me a few hours to draft something proper. Can you come back this afternoon? They agreed and left Pritchard to his work. Back on the street, Cora suggested they stock up on supplies while they waited. We'll need extra food staples to get through winter, and I want to pick up some hardware for repairing the barn roof. They spent the next 2 hours moving between shops, purchasing flour, salt, sugar, coffee, and preserved goods. Yates used most of his remaining money, though Cora insisted on paying more than her share. You're starting with less, she said firmly. We'll balance things out as we go. He didn't argue, though it stung his pride. Pride was a luxury, he reminded himself. Survival came first. At the hardware store they ran into trouble. The owner, a red-faced man named Calloway, looked Cora up and down with barely concealed contempt. Miss Thorne, heard you took on a partner. That's a man's decision you're making. Cora's voice went cold. It's my decision to make, Mr. Calloway. Now I need 20 pounds of nails and 3 sheets of roofing tin. I'm not sure I can extend you credit anymore, times being what they are. I'm paying cash, even so. Resources are tight. Yates stepped forward. He was taller than Calloway and broader through the shoulders, and he used that now, moving into the other man's space. The lady asked for nails and tin. Are you selling goods or not? Calloway backed up a step. Now hold on, because if you're not, we'll take our business to the hardware store in Franklin. I'm sure they'll appreciate the cash money. The threat of lost business did what courtesy hadn't. Calloway's face went even redder, but he nodded curtly. Fine. 20 pounds of nails and 3 sheets of tin. That'll be $8. They completed the transaction in tense silence and left with their supplies. Outside, Cora let out a long breath. Thank you for that. Calloway's been a problem since my father died. He thinks women shouldn't own property. Calloway's an idiot, Yates said flatly. And if he gives you trouble again, let me know. She smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. I will, though I should warn you I'm perfectly capable of fighting my own battles. I don't doubt it. But that doesn't mean you have to fight them alone. They picked up the contract from Pritchard late that afternoon. The lawyer had done thorough work, outlining every detail of their partnership in clear legal language. Both Yates and Cora read it carefully before signing. Pritchard witnessed their signatures and provided them each with a copy. You're now legally bound as equal partners in the Thorne Ranch operation, he said. I hope this arrangement proves profitable for you both. Lord knows we could use some good news around here. Riding back to the ranch, Yates felt lighter than he had in months. He had a future again, uncertain and precarious but real. And he had a partner who was smart, hardworking, and apparently unafraid to take risks. He glanced over at Cora, watching the way she sat her horse with easy confidence, and felt something stir that wasn't just gratitude or relief. She caught him looking and raised an eyebrow. What? Nothing. Just thinking we might actually pull this off. We will. I don't accept failure as an option. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Yates took over the day-to-day management of the herd, working alongside Dutch and the 2 ranch hands, brothers named Pete and Sam. They moved the cattle to better grazing near where Birch Creek ran through a high meadow, rotating them carefully to preserve the drought-stressed grass. The creek was indeed still flowing, just as Cora had promised, a modest stream but steady and cold, fed by deep springs. Yates also began teaching Cora everything he knew about cattle. They spent hours together, riding the property, checking on individual animals, discussing breeding strategies and market timing. She was a quick study, asking intelligent questions and remembering everything he told her. More than once, she surprised him with insights he hadn't considered. "You're good at this," he told her one afternoon as they watched the herd drink from the creek. "You have instincts for it." "I paid more attention to my father than he realized," she said. "I just never had the confidence to trust what I knew. He was always there making the final decisions. Now there's only me." "Well, and you." "Us," Yates corrected. "There's us." She looked at him, and something passed between them, awareness, maybe, or recognition. They were becoming more than business partners. They were becoming friends. And beneath that, something else was building, something neither of them had named yet, but both felt in the long conversations over dinner, in the accidental touches when they worked side by side, in the way they'd started seeking each other out for no practical reason at all. September faded into October, and the drought continued. The entire territory seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for rain that refused to come. Other ranches began to fail. Yates heard reports of violence over water rights, of families abandoning their land, of cattle dying by the hundreds. But the Thorne Ranch held steady. With Birch Creek's reliable water and careful management, their combined herd not only survived, but began to improve in condition. Yates culled the weakest animals and focused resources on the strongest breeding stock. Cora proved to have an unexpected talent for the business side of ranching, negotiating a deal with a buyer from Salt Lake City that would give them premium prices for their beef come spring. They worked from dawn until long after dark most days, falling into bed exhausted. But it was good exhaustion, the kind that came from building something rather than watching it crumble. And through it all, Yates found himself increasingly aware of Cora, the way she laughed at Dutch's terrible jokes, the fierce concentration on her face when she was working through a problem, the unexpected gentleness in her voice when she talked to the horses. He was falling in love with her. The realization came one evening in late October as they sat on the porch of the main house, sharing a pot of coffee and watching the sunset paint the canyon walls red and gold. She was telling him about her childhood, about growing up on this ranch as an only child, lonely but loved. "I always wanted siblings," she said. "Someone to share things with, you know. My father did his best, but after my mother died when I was 10, he sort of closed up, threw himself into work. I understood it even then, but it was still lonely." "I know what you mean," Yates said. "After I lost my parents, the ranch was all I had. It consumed everything, all my time, all my energy, all my dreams. I never let myself want anything else, because wanting more seemed like tempting fate. And now—" He looked at her, at the last light catching in her hair and eyes, and decided to be honest. "Now I'm starting to realize there might be more to life than just survival." Cora held his gaze, and he saw his own feelings reflected their want and uncertainty, and something fierce and bright. "Yates." "I know we're partners," he said quickly. "I know that complicates things. But I need you to know these past few weeks, working with you, getting to know you, it's been the best part of my life in longer than I can remember. You're remarkable, Cora, strong and smart and brave." And she kissed him, leaned across the space between their chairs and pressed her lips to his, cutting off his nervous rambling with direct action. It was a good kiss, warm and certain, tasting like coffee and promise. When she pulled back, she was smiling. "I was waiting for you to say something," she admitted. "I've wanted to do that for weeks." Yates laughed, giddy with relief. "Weeks? Why didn't you?" "Because I wasn't sure if you felt the same way or if you were just being a good partner. Men can be hard to read." "I'll try to be clearer from now on." He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Cora, I'm falling in love with you. Actually, I think I might already be there. And I know it's fast, and I know we have a business partnership to think about, but stop worrying so much," she interrupted, squeezing his hand. "I'm falling in love with you too. Maybe it's fast, but we're living in fast times. When you're facing down disaster, you learn not to waste time on things that matter." He kissed her then, properly, pulling her closer and feeling her arms come around his neck. She fit against him perfectly, warm and solid and real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "This changes things," he murmured. "Maybe it does. Or maybe it just makes us stronger. Partners in business and partners in life, I think that could work, don't you? I think I'd like to find out." They stayed on the porch until full dark, talking and kissing and making plans. Not concrete plans, the future was still too uncertain for that, but the kind of hopeful plans young people made when they were falling in love. Possibilities instead of promises, dreams instead of commitments. It was enough. It was everything. Word spread quickly in a small community like Malad City. By the time Yates and Cora rode to town together the following week, walking close and smiling at shared private jokes, half the territory seemed to know they were courting. The reactions were mixed. Some people were genuinely happy for them, congratulating Cora on finding a good man and Yates on finding a capable woman. Others were less kind, suggesting that Yates was taking advantage of a desperate woman, or that Cora was being foolish with her inheritance. Calloway, the hardware store owner, was particularly obnoxious. "Well, Miss Thorne, I see you found yourself a man after all. Guess that partnership didn't last long before it became something else." Cora faced him with icy calm. "My partnership with Yates is stronger than ever, Mr. Calloway. And what exists between us personally is none of your concern. Now, I believe we have an account with your store, unless you'd like to formally refuse our business. No need to be hostile. I'm just making conversation. Then make better conversation. Yates and I are both tired of small-minded gossip." They left with their supplies and without further comment, but the encounter left Yates angry. "How do you stay so calm with people like that?" "Practice," Cora said dryly. "I've been dealing with men who think I'm incompetent since my father died. You learn to let it roll off, or you spend all your energy being angry. You shouldn't have to deal with it at all." "No, I shouldn't, but I do, so I've learned to manage it." She looked at him, her expression softening. "It helps, though, having you beside me. Knowing someone sees me as capable and equal, that's worth more than you know." They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that only existed between people who understood each other deeply. That evening, Dutch pulled Yates aside while Cora was tending to her horse. "You treating Miss Cora right?" the old foreman asked bluntly. "I am. I swear it." "Good. Because that girl's been through enough, losing her mother young and then her father just when she needed him most. She's tougher than railroad spikes, but even strong people can break if you push them wrong. I have no intention of hurting her, Dutch. I love her." Dutch studied him with sharp old eyes, then nodded slowly. "I believe you do, and she loves you, I can see it. Just remember that love means protecting each other, not just from the world but from yourselves sometimes too. Pride and stubbornness run strong in both of you." "I'll remember." November brought the first snow, light dustings that melted by midday but signaled the approaching winter. The drought still hadn't broken, but the high country snowpack would provide water come spring, assuming there was normal snowfall. Yates and Cora worked to prepare the ranch for the cold months, repairing the barn roof with the tin they'd bought, stocking feed, ensuring the herd had adequate shelter. They also spent more time together in the evenings, often in the main house kitchen where Cora would cook while Yates worked on accounts or repaired tack. It was domestic and peaceful, a preview of the life they were building together. Sometimes Dutch would join them, telling rambling stories about the old days when Idaho Territory was even wilder and more dangerous. Other times it was just the two of them, talking quietly about everything and nothing. One evening in mid-November, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Cora brought up the subject that had been hovering unspoken between them for weeks. "Yates, what are we doing here?" He looked up from the harness he was mending. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're courting, we're running a ranch together, we're building something, but we haven't talked about what comes next. Marriage, staying as we are. I need to know where your head is." He set aside the harness and moved to sit beside her on the sofa. "I want to marry you, Cora. I've wanted that since about 2 weeks after we met. But I didn't want to rush you or make you feel pressured. We're partners first, and I never want you to think I'm trying to take control of your property or your life." "You couldn't take control of me if you tried," she said, but there was affection in her voice. "I want to marry you too. I want to build this ranch together as husband and wife, not just partners. I want children eventually and a real family and all the things I thought I'd have to give up when my father died. Then let's do it. Let's get married." Whenever you want. Tomorrow if you're willing," she laughed. "Not tomorrow, but soon. Before Christmas, maybe. Something small, just us. Dutch, Pete, and Sam, and a preacher. No big fuss." "That sounds perfect." They set the date for the second week of December, giving them time to make minimal preparations and file the necessary paperwork. Cora didn't have family to invite, and Yates's distant cousins were too far away to make the trip on short notice. It would be a simple ceremony, which suited them both fine. They weren't interested in spectacle, just commitment. The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy. The snow began to fall more regularly, and they worked to keep the cattle comfortable and fed. Yates also used some of their saved money to buy Cora a ring from a jeweler in Franklin, a simple gold band with a small garnet stone. It wasn't fancy, but it was beautiful and well made, and when he gave it to her on the 1st of December, she cried. "It's perfect," she said, slipping it onto her finger. "I love it. I love you. I love you too, more than I ever thought I could love anyone." They were married on December 12, 1885, in the small church in Malad City. Cora wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her taller frame, and carried wildflowers that Dutch had somehow managed to find even in early winter. Yates wore his best suit, brushed and pressed, and tried not to shake too badly as he waited at the altar. When Cora walked down the aisle on Dutch's arm, Yates felt his breath catch. She was radiant, her face glowing with happiness, her gray-green eyes locked on his. The ceremony was short and traditional. They exchanged vows, exchanged rings, and sealed their marriage with a kiss that was both chaste and full of promise. Afterward, they had a small meal at the hotel restaurant, paid for by Dutch as a wedding gift. Pete and Sam got pleasantly drunk on whiskey and told embarrassing stories about ranch mishaps, and Cora laughed until tears ran down her face. It was simple and genuine, exactly the kind of celebration they'd wanted. That night, in the main house they now shared as husband and wife, Yates carried Cora over the threshold and up to the bedroom that had been hers alone for so many years. They undressed each other slowly, learning the landscape of skin and muscle, giving and receiving pleasure with the kind of tenderness that came from genuine love. It was perfect and awkward and passionate, everything a wedding night should be. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Cora traced patterns on Yates's chest and said, "I never thought I could be this happy. After my father died, I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone, fighting just to hold onto this place. And then you showed up, or I showed up to you, I guess, and everything changed. You saved me," Yates said quietly. "I was completely broken, Cora. No hope, no future, nothing. And you appeared like something out of a dream, offering water when I was dying of thirst. Not just literal water, though, that too, but hope, a reason to keep going. We saved each other," she corrected. "You gave me the knowledge and confidence I needed to run this ranch properly. You made me believe in myself. That's at least as valuable as water rights. We make a good team." "We do, in every way that matters." Winter settled in hard after that, with snow piling high and temperatures dropping below zero, but the ranch was prepared, and the cattle survived in good condition. Yates and Cora spent the long evenings making plans for the spring, when they would use their profits to expand the herd and possibly purchase the adjacent property that had been abandoned during the drought. They also spent those evenings learning to be married, negotiating the small compromises and adjustments that came with sharing a life. Cora was fiercely independent and sometimes stubborn about accepting help. Yates tended to be overprotective and had to learn to trust her capability. But they worked through their differences with patience and humor, both committed to making the marriage as strong as their partnership. By February, Cora suspected she might be pregnant. By March, the doctor in Malad City confirmed it. She would have a baby in late September or early October. Yates was simultaneously terrified and elated, already imagining a son or daughter to raise on this land they were building together. "Are you scared?" he asked one evening as they sat together, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "A little," Cora admitted. "My mother died young, and I don't have many memories of her. I don't know if I'll be a good mother." "You'll be an excellent mother. You're strong and smart and loving. Our children are going to be lucky. Children plural. Getting ahead of yourself, aren't you? Maybe. But I like the idea of a big family. The ranch could use the energy." She laughed and kissed him. "Let's get through the first one before we plan a whole brood." April brought the rains. After nearly a year of drought, the skies opened and poured life back onto the parched land. It rained for 3 days straight, soaking into the earth and filling the dried creek beds. Birch Creek swelled to twice its normal size, roaring down from the mountains with snowmelt and fresh precipitation. Yates stood in the rain with Cora, both of them laughing and spinning like children, faces turned up to the water falling from the sky. The drought was over. They'd survived. More than survived, they'd thrived, building something strong enough to weather the worst nature could throw at them. "We did it," Cora shouted over the sound of the rain. "We actually did it, we did," Yates agreed, pulling her close and kissing her wet face. "Together." With the drought broken, ranches throughout Idaho began to recover. But the Thorne Ranch, now officially Morrow Thorne in the county records, was ahead of most, their herd healthy and their water rights secure. They were able to purchase 40 additional head of cattle at excellent prices from desperate sellers, nearly doubling their operation. By summer, they were indisputably successful. Buyers came from as far as Denver to look at their stock. Other ranchers asked Yates for advice on breeding and management. Cora's business acumen became well known, and she was consulted on contracts and negotiations. Together, they became a force in Box Elder County, respected and prosperous. In late September, Cora went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Yates feared he might lose her. But she was as strong in childbirth as she was in everything else. and after 14 hours, she delivered a healthy baby boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. They named him Thomas, after Cora's father, with Yates's father's name James as a middle name. Thomas James Morrow, heir to a ranch that would be his someday, symbol of everything his parents had built together. Yates held his son for the first time and felt tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect. You're perfect. God, Cora, I love you so much." "I love you too," she whispered, exhausted but smiling. "We made something beautiful, didn't we?" "We did. In more ways than one." Thomas was a good baby, healthy and curious, and both parents doted on him shamelessly. Dutch declared himself honorary grandfather and could often be found rocking the baby while singing off-key frontier ballads. Pete and Sam took their roles as honorary uncles seriously, already planning to teach the boy to ride as soon as he could walk. The ranch continued to prosper. By 1887, they owned 200 head of cattle and had purchased the adjacent property, nearly doubling their acreage. Yates built a new barn and expanded the main house, adding rooms for the children he and Cora planned to have. Their second child, a daughter named Emma Rose, was born in the spring of 1888. She had Cora's gray-green eyes and a temperament that suggested she would be every bit as determined as her mother. Thomas, now 2.5, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly trying to help care for her in his clumsy toddler way. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, of building something that would last beyond their own lifetimes. Yates and Cora still worked side by side every day, managing the ranch as equal partners, making decisions together. Their love had only deepened over the years, weathering the challenges of drought and childbirth and the thousand small struggles of daily life. One evening in the summer of 1889, they sat together on the porch of the house. They'd expanded and improved, watching Thomas chase fireflies while baby Emma dozed in Cora's arms. The air smelled like hay and distant rain, and the mountains stood purple against the darkening sky. "Do you ever think about that day I showed up at your old place?" Cora asked. "How desperate we both were." "Sometimes," Yates admitted. "It feels like another lifetime, like it happened to different people." "In a way, it did. We've both changed so much since then. Grown into something bigger than we were alone." "You saved my life that day, Cora. I mean that literally. I was ready to give up, to just let the drought take everything. And then you appeared with water rights and a proposal and a kind of stubborn hope I couldn't resist." "We saved each other," Cora said, echoing words she'd spoken on their wedding night. "You gave me the courage to believe I could run this ranch, raise a family, build something real. I couldn't have done any of it without you." Yates reached for her free hand, lacing their fingers together. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been if you hadn't come, if I'd just given up and left Idaho, drifted away to nothing. But I did come, and you didn't give up, and now look at what we have." She gestured to the ranch spread out before them, to Thomas laughing in the twilight, to Emma sleeping peacefully. "This is what we built from nothing but water and hope and hard work. This is what love looks like when it's given time to grow." "We can share this," Yates said softly, remembering her words from that first day. "That's what you told me, and you were right. Sharing made us both stronger. It did, and it always will." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, watching their son play and feeling their daughter's steady breathing. Around them, the ranch hummed with life cattle lowing in distant pastures, horses moving in their stalls, crickets beginning their evening song. The drought was a memory now, a scar on the land that was healing year by year. In the years that followed, the Cora Thorne Ranch became one of the most successful operations in southeastern Idaho. Yates and Cora had two more children, another son in 1890 and a daughter in 1892. They weathered economic panics, harsh winters, and the thousand challenges of ranch life, but they did it together, always partners, always equals. Dutch Henderson lived to be 83, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1898. They buried him on the ranch he'd called home for 40 years, under a cottonwood tree he'd loved. Pete and Sam stayed on, eventually marrying local women and building houses on the property, becoming part of the extended family that made the ranch function. Yates taught all his children to work hard and treat people fairly, lessons his own father had taught him. Cora made sure all of them, sons and daughters alike, learned the business side of ranching, so they could make their own choices about their futures. The water rights to Birch Creek remained the foundation of the ranch's success, that precious resource that had brought two desperate people together when they most needed each other. As they grew older, Yates and Cora often found themselves on that same porch where they'd spent so many evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains and remembering their journey. From desperation to partnership to love to family, they traveled further than miles could measure, grown into people they might not have recognized in their desperate younger selves. No regrets. Yates asked one evening in the summer of 1900, as they celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. "Not a single one," Cora replied, leaning against his shoulder. Her hair was streaked with gray now, and lines had appeared around her eyes and mouth, but she was still the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. "Everything we built, everything we are, I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the drought, because it brought you to me. Or me to you. Either way, it brought us together." Their children were playing in the yard. Thomas, now 15 and already taking serious responsibility on the ranch. Emma at 12, showing a head for figures that suggested she'd run the business side one day. Jacob at 10, horse crazy and fearless. And little Sarah at 8, thoughtful and gentle with animals. 4 strong, healthy children, raised with love and discipline, ready to carry on what their parents had built. "What do you think happens next?" Cora asked. "When the children are grown and gone, when it's just us again?" "I think we keep doing what we've always done. Working together, building something that matters, loving each other through whatever comes. That's enough for me. That's everything. For me too." The sun dropped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose and deep purple. Stars began to emerge, the same stars that had watched over two desperate young people making a crazy bargain in the dying days of a drought. The same stars that had blessed their partnership, their love, their family. Below the house, Birch Creek sang its eternal song, flowing down from the mountains with cold, clear water. The water that had saved them, that had made everything else possible. The water they'd learned to share, just as they'd learned to share everything else: work and worry, joy and sorrow, failure and success. Yates pulled Cora closer, and she wrapped her arm around his waist, and they stayed there until full dark. Two people who'd become one through circumstance and choice, through water and hope, and a kind of love that only grows stronger with time. In the house behind them, the children's laughter rang out. In the barn, the horses settled for the night. In the pastures, the cattle grazed on grass that grew green and thick, nourished by water that never failed. And on the porch, two people who'd once lost everything held each other and counted their blessings, knowing that the greatest blessing was simply each other. The drought had taken so much, but in the end it had given even more. It had brought two strangers together when they most needed hope. It had forged a partnership that became a marriage that became a family. It had taught them that the most valuable things in life, water, love, trust were meant to be shared, not hoarded. And on a small ranch in southeastern Idaho, on land watered by an ancient creek and tended by hands that had learned to work together, that lesson lived on in every blade of grass, every healthy animal, every laughing child. They'd lost everything in a drought. She'd appeared with water rights and said, "We can share this." And in sharing, they'd gained the world. Years later, when Yates was 72 and Cora 71, they would sit on that same porch with their grandchildren gathered around, telling the story of how they met. The children would listen wide-eyed to tales of the great drought, of desperate times and brave choices, of two people who'd bet everything on each other and won. "So grandmother just rode up and offered to save you?" one grandchild would ask. "She did," Yates would confirm, reaching for Cora's hand as he'd done 1,000 times before. "Appeared like an angel with water rights and a crazy proposal." "It wasn't crazy," Cora would protest, as she always did. "It was practical. We needed each other. We did, and we still do." The grandchildren would eventually scatter back to their games, but Yates and Cora would remain on the porch, hands clasped, watching the sunset that never got old. The ranch around them would be thriving, now run primarily by Thomas and Emma with help from their siblings, a true family operation that employed dozens of people and ran thousands of head of cattle. But the heart of it remained the same Birch Creek flowing eternal, the land they'd saved together, the love they'd built from nothing but need and hope and stubborn determination. "I love you," Yates would say, as he'd said countless times over nearly 4 decades together. "I love you too," Cora would reply, as she always had and always would. And the water would keep flowing, and the sun would keep setting, and the story would go on, passed down through generations as a reminder that the best things in life, love, family, home, often come from the most desperate moments, when two people choose to share instead of compete, to build together instead of struggle alone. They'd lost everything in a drought, but in the end, they'd found everything that mattered. In each other, in their children, in the land they'd saved and nurtured. In the simple truth that some things grow stronger when shared, that some partnerships transcend business to become something sacred and permanent. The drought had been the worst thing that ever happened to either of them. It had also been the beginning of the best thing, a love story written in water and sweat and faith, a partnership that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. And on summer evenings, when the light was just right and the air smelled of grass and distant rain, you could still see them on that porch, two old people holding hands, watching the sunset over the mountains, grateful for every moment of the life they'd built together from nothing but water rights and a willingness to share. That was the legacy they left behind. Not just a successful ranch or a thriving family, but a reminder that generosity in desperate times could create miracles, that love could grow from the most practical beginnings, that two people willing to share everything could build something that would last for generations. The water rights to Birch Creek would remain in the Morrow Thorne family for over a century, precious and protected, a reminder of where it all began. And the story of how Yates and Cora met would be told and retold, embellished and celebrated, becoming part of family legend. But the truth at the heart of it remained simple and pure. He'd lost everything in a drought. She'd appeared with water rights and said, "We can share this." And in that sharing, they'd found not just survival but love, not just partnership but family, not just a solution to immediate problems but a foundation for everything that followed. It was a story about water, yes. But more than that, it was a story about hope. About two people brave enough to trust each other when they had nothing left to lose. About building something beautiful from the ashes of disaster. And that, in the end, was what made it worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating on summer evenings as the sun set over Idaho mountains and water flowed eternal through land that had been saved by sharing, by love, by the simple courage of two desperate people who chose each other when they most needed choosing. They'd shared the water. And in doing so, they'd shared everything else: a life, a love, a legacy that would outlive them both and continue to water the earth long after they were gone. That was the real miracle. Not the water itself, though that was precious, but the willingness to share it. The generosity that sparked love, the partnership that became family, the practical arrangement that transformed into something sacred. On the porch of the Cora Thorne ranch, in the fading light of countless evenings, two people proved that the best response to drought, to any disaster, was not to hoard what little you had, but to share it with someone who needed it equally. And in that sharing to find not scarcity but abundance, not loss but gain, not ending but beginning. The drought had taken everything, but love, born from water and hope and the courage to share, had given it all back tenfold. And that was a story worth living, worth remembering, worth passing down through the generations as a reminder of what matters most. Not wealth or success or triumph over adversity, though those things mattered too, but love, partnership. The willingness to share what you have with someone who needs it, and to build something together that neither of you could have built alone. That was what Yates and Cora had done. That was what they'd created. That was what they'd leave behind: not just a thriving ranch or a large family, but an example of how to live with generosity and courage, how to love with your whole heart, how to build something beautiful from the most desperate circumstances. And as the last light faded from the Idaho sky and the stars emerged bright and eternal, the story continued. Water flowed, children laughed, cattle grazed on green grass, and two old people held hands on a porch, grateful for the drought that had brought them together, grateful for the water that had saved them, most grateful of all for each other and the life they'd shared. It was enough. It was everything. It was exactly what they'd built that day when she'd appeared with water rights and said, "We can share this." And he'd said yes. And their lives had changed forever in the best possible way.